8-year-old Jaden Lawrence stood in the middle of the black marble floor, his small hands holding a wrinkled white envelope against his chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Behind Jaden's eyes lived a kind of bravery that didn't match his slight frame or his worn-out jacket. He'd crossed Chicago all by himself, through streets that could swallow a child whole, worked out which buses to take and where to get off, all because his mother, fading fast, had asked him to. Jaden wasn't just a little boy. He was a warrior in worn-out sneakers. The Mercer Tower rose 50 stories into the dull gray Chicago sky, and inside, everything shouted power and danger without ever raising its voice. Black marble floors, crystal chandeliers, men in dark suits posted at every corner with eyes that watched like cameras and judged like knives. No one smiled here. Jaden walked up to the reception desk, lifting onto his tiptoes just to see over the edge. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to give this letter to Mr. Ashton Mercer. My mom said it's life or death." The receptionist's face drained of color. In 3 years working here, no one had ever simply walked in and asked to see the boss. People didn't request meetings with Ashton Mercer. They were summoned, or they never came at all. "Sweetheart, Mr. Mercer is a very busy man. Maybe I could give him the letter for you?" "No, please." Jaden's voice fell to a whisper, as if the building itself might overhear. "My mom said I have to give it to him myself. She said this letter might save us both." The receptionist noticed his eyes, that exact same uncommon shade she saw every day in the cold gaze of her boss. Against every rule she'd been taught to respect, she picked up the phone and called the top floor. High above in the penthouse, Ashton Mercer sat in his dark office, like a king on a throne. At 33, he was the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld. His suit cost more than most people made in a year. His face was perfectly blank. His office was perfectly cold. No photographs, no keepsakes, no softness, just power. When he heard the name Lawrence, his hand froze. He hadn't heard that name in 8 years. The name of the woman he'd loved, the woman who'd betrayed him, the woman he'd thrown out into the rain and never looked back. Send him up, now. The elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, and Jaden stepped into an office of shadows and glass, the windows laying all of Chicago out below like a map of lights and hard choices. But he didn't look at the city. He looked at the man behind the desk. Ashton Mercer rose slowly, tall, broad-shouldered, a face that looked carved from stone, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and his eyes were a cold gray, like a winter storm, the exact same color as Jaden's. "You're Ashton Mercer?" Jaden asked, his voice small but steady. "I am. My mom sent me. She said you owe her at least the truth." Ashton took the envelope. His name was written there in handwriting he knew better than his own, handwriting he'd spent 8 years trying to forget. He opened it. His eyes moved across the words, and with every line, something shifted in his face, his jaw tightening, his breath catching, the stillness around him breaking in ways no one in that tower had ever seen. His hands that had never trembled while making life or death decisions, began to shake. What was in that letter? Why would a dying woman send her 8-year-old son alone across the most dangerous city to find a mafia boss? And why did the most feared man in Chicago suddenly feel his frozen heart begin to crack? If you want to know what happens next, smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Ashton read the letter, then reread it, his eyes tracing the words a third time as the truth sank in. Each time he read it, the words went through him like blades, cutting deeper into his chest. The letter was written in trembling handwriting, yet it was still so heartbreakingly familiar. "Ashton, when you read these lines, I probably don't have much time left. The doctor says the cancer has metastasized. They're giving me a few weeks, maybe less. I'm not writing this to ask for your pity. I'm writing because there are things you need to know, truths you didn't give me the chance to explain 8 years ago. Do you remember the photographs? The photographs someone handed you that night? Ashton, the man in those pictures is Patrick, my cousin. He flew from Boston to see me that very day because my mother was seriously ill, and he brought a message from her. We only hugged like family, like brother and sister. Nothing more. There was never anything more. Those photographs were edited, cut, and spliced to make it look like I betrayed you. I tried to explain. I got down on my knees and begged you to listen. But you turned your back and walked away, and you never looked back. I don't blame you. You believed what you saw. But Ashton, what I'm about to say next will change everything. Ashton felt his heart stop when he reached the next line. The boy standing in front of you, Jaden, is your son, your biological son. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you threw me out. I tried to contact you dozens of times, calling, writing letters. I even went to your office, but nothing ever reached you. I don't know why. In the end, I gave up. I raised our child alone for 8 years. Not because I wanted to hide him from you, but because I had one last shred of dignity. I wouldn't beg a man who threw me away like trash, but now I'm about to die. And Jaden will have no one. Ashton, our son doesn't know you're his father. I want you to have a choice before I tell him. If you don't want to claim him, I understand. But if you have even the smallest conscience left, please don't let Jaden be orphaned by both father and mother. He's endured far too much. He deserves to be loved. Catherine. The letter slipped from Ashton's hand. He stood there like a statue, not breathing, not moving. For nearly a decade, Ashton had lived in hatred, cursing Catherine's name whenever it drifted through his mind. He had spent those 8 years building an icy wall around his heart because he believed the woman he loved had betrayed him, and it had all been a lie. Ashton slowly lifted his eyes to the boy standing in front of him. This time he truly looked. Not the way you look at a stranger's child, but the way you look when you're searching for something you're afraid to find. And he found it. Gray eyes. Eyes identical to the ones he saw in the mirror every morning. A straight, sharply defined bridge of a nose, like his. A hard, stubborn chin, like his. The way the boy stood with his back straight, his head held high even though he was frightened. Exactly like Ashton when he was small. Raymond, standing by the door, saw it too. The loyal man who had followed Ashton for 15 years drew in a sharp breath. He looked from Ashton to Jaden, then back to Ashton. The resemblance was so obvious it couldn't be denied. "Boss?" Raymond started, but Ashton lifted a hand, signaling silence. He bent down and picked up the letter, reading it again, and then again, as if reading it one more time could change what was written there. But it didn't. The words stayed the same. The truth stayed the same. Jaden stood still, watching the man in front of him with eyes older than his years. The boy didn't know what the letter said. His mother had only told him this was the most important thing. She'd said Mr. Mercer would understand once he finished reading. She'd said maybe he would help. Maybe. "Your mother?" Ashton spoke at last, his voice rough and raw, as if he hadn't spoken in years. "Where is your mother now?" "At the free hospital on the south side," Jaden answered. "They said she doesn't have money for more treatment. They said," the boy's voice trembled, "they said my mom won't make it." 8 years of hatred collapsed in 60 seconds. The woman he had thrown away was dying, and the boy standing before him was his son. The memories came rushing back like a tsunami, drowning Ashton in a past he'd tried to bury for 8 long years. He remembered himself at 25, standing beside his father's coffin. An entire underworld empire dropped onto his shoulders before he'd even had time to wipe his tears dry. The other bosses looked at him the way predators look at prey, waiting for him to break, waiting for the moment they could swallow the Mercer Empire whole. The pressure was massive, crushing down on him every day. But there had been one person who stayed by his side, one person who made him feel he was still human, not just a machine built for power. Catherine Lawrence, the daughter of the housekeeper Margaret. They'd grown up together in that very estate. Kate was the little girl who used to sneak cookies up to the young master's room whenever he was being punished. Kate was the first teenage girl to make Ashton's heart stumble out of rhythm. Kate was the only woman who truly saw him, not the money or the power, but the man underneath. Ashton had planned to marry her. He didn't care if the entire underworld mocked Boss Mercer for taking the housekeeper's daughter. He didn't care if enemies treated it as weakness. To him, Catherine was everything. He'd ordered a wedding ring. He'd prepared his proposal. Then, that night came. Someone knocked on his office door when it was already late. Someone handed him an envelope with a look of counterfeit sorrow that he hadn't recognized at the time. Inside were photographs. Catherine in the arms of a strange man. Catherine resting her head on that man's shoulder. Catherine smiling at him with a smile Ashton had believed belonged only to him. He remembered the pain as if someone had shoved a hand into his ribcage and crushed his heart in their fist. He remembered the fury igniting, burning away every shred of reason. He summoned Catherine immediately. She walked into the room with a bright smile. not knowing her world was about to collapse. Ashton threw the photographs into her face. He remembered her green eyes widening in horror. He remembered her trying to explain, saying it was her cousin, saying he'd only come to visit, saying there was nothing between them. But Ashton didn't listen. He couldn't. The pain and the sense of betrayal had made him deaf, made him blind. "Get out of here," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Ashton, please, listen to me explain." Catherine dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." He turned his back and stepped into the darkness, leaving her sobbing on the floor. That was the last time he saw her. Until today. Until this letter. Until the boy with the same gray eyes standing in front of him. Ashton blinked, the memories dissolving, the present crashing in with brutal force. He looked at Jaden, really looked. His son. 8 years of having a son and never knowing it. 8 years of this boy growing up without a father, in poverty, in need, while Ashton sat on a mountain of money and told himself he was the victim of betrayal. "You said your mother is in a hospital on the south side?" Ashton asked, his voice trembling slightly no matter how hard he tried to control it. Jaden nodded. "The free hospital. It's really crowded. My mom has to share a room with lots of other people. Some days there isn't even enough pain medicine. A free hospital. Catherine, the woman he'd once wanted to give the whole world, was dying in a hospital meant for the homeless while he lived in luxury. What do they mean there's no money to keep treating her?" Ashton asked, even though he already knew the answer. "It means they're going to stop giving my mom medicine." Jaden swallowed. "They said my mom needs surgery, but there isn't enough money. They said..." The boy stopped, his lower lip trembling. "They said my mom only has a few weeks left, maybe less." Ashton clenched his fist. The King of Chicago had everything money could buy. But he couldn't buy back the 8 years that had been stolen from his own flesh and blood. The convoy of glossy black Rolls-Royce cars glided through the streets of Chicago like a moving storm cloud. Ashton sat in the back seat, Jaden beside him, the boy occasionally stealing glances at this unfamiliar man with a look that mixed curiosity and hope. Raymond drove, glancing into the rearview mirror now and then, worry written in his eyes. No one spoke. The silence weighed heavier than any words could have. When the convoy entered the south side, the scenery changed completely. Bright high-rises gave way to rows of old, crumbling buildings. Graffiti covered the walls. Homeless people lay curled up on street corners. This was another Chicago. A Chicago Ashton had tried to forget long ago. The place where the woman he'd once loved had lived and slowly died for 8 years. The free hospital appeared like an open wound in the middle of the city. The walls were blotched with damp mold stains. Cracked glass doors were held together with strips of tape. Patients lay scattered in the hallways because there weren't enough beds inside. The smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with the smell of desperation. The Rolls-Royce convoy pulled up in front of the hospital like a cruel, heartless irony. Jaden jumped out first, his small feet hurrying ahead, guiding them through narrow hallways. The boy had clearly walked this route so many times he knew every turn by heart. Ashton followed behind, drawing curious and fearful stares as a Mafia boss in an expensive suit stepped through a place this poor. But he didn't care, his attention fixed on the small back of Jaden in front of him. They stopped at the door of a shared ward. 6 beds were lined up close together, separated only by thin, faded curtains. Jaden went straight to the bed at the far end, where a woman lay motionless, her eyes closed tight. Ashton stopped, as if rooted to the floor. It was Catherine, but not the Catherine from his memories. The woman on the bed was so thin her cheekbones stood out sharply. Skin that had once been healthy and warm was now pale as paper. The glossy brown hair he remembered was now sparse, nearly gone from chemotherapy. Her arms were covered in needle marks from IV lines, gaunt as dry branches. But when Jaden touched his mother's hand and called softly, Catherine opened her eyes, and in the instant she saw her son had come back safe, a smile flared across her hollowed face. That smile was still as beautiful as it had been 8 years ago. Still the smile that once made Ashton's heart melt. "You're back," Catherine whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "Did you find him? Did he read the letter?" "Yes, Mom." Jaden held her hand tightly. He's here." Catherine looked up. Green eyes met gray eyes. 8 years vanished in a single heartbeat. The smile on her lips froze. The silence stretched until it felt impossible to breathe. "You really came," Catherine said at last, her tone holding no emotion he could read. Ashton stepped closer. He wanted to say so many things. He wanted to ask why she hadn't tried harder to contact him. He wanted to ask why she'd endured it all alone for 8 years. But the first words that came out of his mouth were, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? 8 years, Catherine. 8 years you raised my son by yourself." Something flashed in Catherine's eyes. Bitterness, mockery, and an old pain turned into scar tissue. "Tell you." Her voice stayed gentle, but every syllable landed like a knife. "Did you give me a chance to open my mouth? I knelt at your feet, begging you to listen while I tried to explain. You turned your back and walked away and never looked back. I wrote letters. I called. I even went to your office. Nothing ever reached you. So what did you want me to do? Bash my head against the walls of your house until you finally agreed to listen?" Ashton felt as if he'd been slapped. Every word she said was true. Painful, ruthless, but true. I was wrong," he said, his voice catching. "I was too angry and I wouldn't listen." "You were wrong," Catherine repeated, exhaustion in her voice. "You were wrong, and I paid for your mistake for 8 years. She closed her eyes as if looking at him was too tiring. "But I didn't call you here to listen to you apologize. I don't have time for that anymore. What I need, the only thing I'm asking, is that you take care of Jaden when I'm gone. He's your son, whether you admit it or not. He deserves a future. That's all I need from you." Ashton looked at the woman on the hospital bed, the woman who should have hated him to the bone. But even as she hovered at the edge of death, Catherine was thinking only of her son. She had every right to hate him. Yet even as she was fading, even as she was shattered beyond repair, Catherine could only think of her child. Dozens of kilometers from the free hospital, on the other side of glittering Chicago, Melanie Ashford was standing before an enormous mirror inside the most luxurious wedding dress boutique in the city. The haute couture gown, priced at $60,000, clung to her flawless figure. Fine French lace, thousands of Swarovski crystals sewn in place, a train 3 meters long that had been hand-stitched over 6 months. Melanie turned slowly in front of the mirror, studying herself from every angle. Just 2 weeks left. 2 weeks until she would officially become Mrs. Mercer. 2 weeks until she would stand at the very peak of power beside the most powerful man in Chicago. 8 years of waiting. 8 years of patience. 8 years of playing the perfect woman at Ashton's side. And now it was all about to be rewarded. The phone in her handbag vibrated. Melanie meant to ignore it. Then she saw the sender's name. One of the people she'd planted inside Mercer Tower to monitor Ashton's every move. She opened the message. "Boss just met a child around 8 years old. The kid's last name is Lawrence. He brought a letter." Boss's face changed after he read it. Now the whole convoy is on the way to the free hospital on the south side. The wedding dress slipped from Melanie's hand. She stood there as if struck by lightning, staring at the phone screen. Lawrence. That name rose like a ghost from the past and wrapped its fingers around her throat. No. Impossible. Catherine Lawrence was supposed to be gone forever. She was supposed to die in poverty and be forgotten in some back corner of the world. 8 years with no word. 8 years in which Melanie had been certain that chapter was closed for good. And now, a child. The last name Lawrence. 8 years old. Melanie calculated in her head, and the blood in her veins seemed to turn to ice. 8 years ago, she had pushed Catherine out of Ashton's life. If that child was 8, that meant... She looked into the mirror. Her perfect, beautiful face was now pale as a corpse. Her red-painted lips trembled. Her hand squeezed the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. She turned to her assistant. "Get out. All of you. Get out. Right now." Her voice was so cold the staff hurried out without daring to ask a single question. When the fitting room was finally empty, Melanie dialed her father, Wesley Ashford, the boss of one of Chicago's oldest Mafia families, a strategic ally of the Mercer Empire. "Dad." Melanie's voice shook even as she tried to control it. "We have a problem. A big problem. Calm down." Wesley's voice was low and icy. "Tell your father what happened. Catherine Lawrence." Melanie spat the name out as if it were poison. "She's back. And there's a child. 8 years old. Ashton just got a letter from her, and he's on his way to see her." Silence stretched on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" "My people reported it. The name Lawrence. 8 years old." Ashton's face changed after he read the letter. She heard her father exhale. "This is complicated. You have to do something," Melanie almost shouted. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. I can't let everything fall apart now. I can't. I told you. Calm down, Wesley said slowly. Let me think. For now, you mustn't do anything rash. Keep acting normal. Don't let Ashton suspect anything. The call ended. Melanie stared into the mirror, into her own blue eyes. The first wave of fear gradually drained away, replaced by a colder, calculating light. She had waited 8 years. She had sacrificed 8 years of her youth to stand where she was standing. She had done things no one was ever allowed to know about to force Catherine Lawrence out of Ashton's life. She wasn't going to let anyone steal what belonged to her. No one. Melanie had built her future on a secret, and that secret had just stepped back into Ashton's life. Ashton didn't waste another second. The moment he stepped out of the shared ward, he pulled out his phone and began issuing orders, his voice as cold and decisive as it was when he ran his underworld empire. Raymond, call Dr. Samuel Grant. Tell him he has 15 minutes to get to St. Mary's Hospital. I don't care where he is or what he's doing. 15 minutes. Raymond nodded and moved at once. Dr. Grant was Chicago's leading oncologist, a man who served only the elite and the powerful. He wouldn't dare refuse a call from Ashton Mercer. 20 minutes later, Catherine was transferred from the miserable free hospital to the VIP suite at St. Mary's, the most expensive private hospital in the city. The room was spacious, with glass windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a bed as soft as one in a 5-star hotel, and a private nursing team on duty 24 hours a day. Dr. Grant arrived exactly as ordered. He spent 2 hours running a comprehensive examination of Catherine's condition, reviewing every medical record, ordering additional scans and tests. When he stepped out of the room, his face was grave. It's not good, Dr. Grant said bluntly. The cancer has metastasized to the liver and the lungs. That hospital didn't have the equipment or the medication to stop the spread. Ashton stood still like stone, only his jaw tightening. Chances of saving her. If surgery is combined with a new targeted drug from Germany, her chance of survival is 40%. Dr. Grant hesitated. But the cost is extremely high. That medication isn't approved in the United States yet, so it has to be imported privately. In total, it could reach... I'm not asking about money. Ashton cut him off. 40% or 4%. Do it. Find a way. Buy the drug from Germany, from Switzerland, from anywhere. Fly in the best doctors in the world if you have to. Money isn't the issue. Her life is the issue. Dr. Grant nodded, not daring to say anything more. He'd worked with many wealthy and powerful people, but he had never seen eyes like Ashton's in that moment. They were the eyes of a man willing to burn the world down to save one life. 3 days later, Catherine was stable enough to be moved, and Ashton made a decision that surprised everyone. He would bring her and Jaden back to the Mercer estate. Catherine protested immediately. I don't need your pity, she said, her voice weak but her pride still intact. This hospital is good enough. I don't want to owe you anything more. Ashton looked at her, his gaze softening slightly from its usual chill. This isn't pity, Catherine. It's responsibility. Responsibility to you. Responsibility to my son. And it's what I should have done 8 years ago. Don't take away my chance to fix my mistake. Catherine wanted to argue, but she didn't have the strength. And she knew that no matter how proud she was, she couldn't refuse a better environment for her son. For Jaden, she would accept anything. The Mercer estate was still as imposing as it had been 8 years ago. The massive iron gate opened, and the convoy rolled slowly onto the stone-paved drive leading to the 3-story mansion. When the car stopped, a silver-haired woman was already waiting on the front steps. Margaret, the housekeeper who had served the Mercer family for 40 years, and Catherine's own mother. When she saw her daughter being helped out of the car, gaunt and pale in a wheelchair, Margaret broke into tears. My girl. Oh God, my girl. She rushed forward and wrapped Catherine in her arms. You're so thin. You've suffered so much. Why didn't you come back for your mother? Why did you endure it alone for all these years? Catherine sobbed in her mother's embrace. 8 years since they'd seen each other. 8 years in which Margaret hadn't known whether her daughter was alive or dead, because Catherine had been too proud to return to the place that had thrown her out. Jaden stood nearby, watching his grandmother and his mother cry, and his own eyes filled too, even though he didn't understand everything. After Catherine was taken inside to rest, Margaret pulled Ashton aside. Her eyes were still red, but her voice was firm. Young master, I have many things I want to tell you. About that night. About what I saw but wasn't allowed to say. About the person who gave you those photographs. Ashton looked at the housekeeper, something flashing in his eyes. You know who did it. I know more than you think. But back then I had no proof. And no one would listen. Ashton fell silent for a moment, then nodded. Not yet, but soon. I'll find the truth, Margaret. I promise. That night, Jaden lay beside his mother on the hospital bed that had been set up specially in the largest room of the estate. The boy looked around with wide, astonished eyes. Mom, this house is so big, he whispered. Bigger than my school. But Mom, Mr. Mercer, he looked at you like he wanted to cry. Catherine stroked her son's hair and didn't answer, but her own eyes were wet. The Mercer estate had been cold and empty for 8 years. Tonight, 2 broken souls had finally returned to warm its walls. Melanie Ashford's blazing red Porsche swept through the gates of the Mercer estate, as if she were the rightful owner of the place. The guards didn't dare stop the boss's fiancé. Melanie stepped out of the car in a tight red dress that showed off her perfect curves, her high heels tapping a crisp rhythm on the stone path. A radiant smile bloomed on her lips. The smile she'd practiced for 8 years until it was perfect down to the last millimeter. She needed to see it with her own eyes. She needed to know what her enemy looked like after 8 years. She needed to measure just how dangerous this situation really was. Melanie moved around the side of the mansion toward the garden, where the servants said the young master was, and then she stopped dead. Beneath the canopy of an ancient oak, in a wheelchair, a gaunt woman sat in the sunlight, even though illness had ravaged her body, even though her hair had thinned and her skin had turned pale. Melanie recognized her instantly. Catherine Lawrence, the enemy she'd believed she had buried forever in the past. And beside Catherine was a boy around 8 years old, reading a book aloud to his mother. The boy lifted his head at the sound of footsteps, and Melanie felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. Gray eyes identical to Ashton's. No DNA test needed, no further proof required. The truth was as clear as day. Catherine had given Ashton a son. Melanie's face froze for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. 8 years of acting had made her a master at hiding what she felt. At that exact moment, Ashton stepped out of the house. He saw Melanie and walked toward her with an expression no one could read. Ashton, darling, Melanie sang out, her voice sweet as honey. I came to surprise you, but you didn't tell me you had guests. She glanced toward Catherine with her flawless smile. And this is Catherine, Ashton answered curtly, and her son, Jaden. They'll be staying here for a while. Don't ask anything else. His voice was cold and final, leaving no room for argument. Melanie felt her nails dig into her palms, but her smile didn't falter. Oh, Catherine Lawrence. I remember her. The old housemaid. Right. What a surprise. She turned to Catherine with a look of fabricated pity. You don't look very well. How sad. Catherine didn't respond. She only looked at Melanie with a calm so strange it was almost unsettling, as if she was too exhausted to care about anything beyond her son. Jaden stepped in front of his mother as if to protect her, his eyes fixed on Melanie with a caution far beyond his years. Ashton took Melanie's hand and pulled her into the house, away from Catherine and Jaden's sight. When the study door closed, Melanie's smile vanished completely. What are you doing, Ashton? She asked, her voice sharp and cold. Our wedding is in 2 weeks. Why is that woman in your house? And what is that child? The wedding is postponed, Ashton said without the slightest hesitation. Postponed. Melanie almost screamed. Because of that woman. Have you forgotten she betrayed you? Have you forgotten those photographs? She's a liar. I'm reinvestigating everything that happened 8 years ago. Ashton cut in, his gaze drilling into Melanie like twin blades. Everything. Those photographs. The person who brought them to me. The reason Catherine couldn't reach me afterward. All of it. Melanie felt the blood drain from her face. You don't believe me. I don't believe anyone until I have answers, Ashton replied coldly. Including you, Melanie. Including you. The silence stretched, suffocating. Melanie wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to make Ashton change his mind, but she knew that would only make her look guiltier. She drew a slow breath and forced a smile. All right, I understand. You need time. I'll wait. She walked out, keeping her elegance intact until she slid into her car and the estate gate closed behind her. Only then did the mask fall away completely. Melanie's face twisted with rage and fear. Her hand trembled as she dialed her father. Dad, her voice shook. He's investigating. He doesn't trust me anymore. He postponed the wedding. We have to act. Right now, before it's too late. The wedding had been postponed, the mask was cracking, and Melanie knew she had to strike before the truth buried her. 3 days after the confrontation with Melanie, Raymond knocked on the door of Ashton's study with a thick file in his hands. There was a tightness on the loyal man's face, something rare in someone who'd seen everything the underworld could show a person. Ashton motioned for Raymond to sit. "Tell me, what did you find?" Raymond opened the file, laying enlarged photographs and analysis reports on the desk. "Boss, I sent the photographs from 8 years ago to the best forensic lab for analysis using the newest technology available today. The results." He stopped and drew a breath. "Those photographs are fake. They were edited with Photoshop in an extremely sophisticated way." Ashton didn't speak. He only gripped the armrest of his chair until his knuckles tightened. Raymond continued. The analysts pointed out multiple anomalies. The angle of the light on Miss Lawrence and on the man doesn't match, as if they were merged from 2 different photos. The shadows are off by a few degrees. The resolution around the face and the resolution around the body differ slightly. 8 years ago, the technology wasn't advanced enough to detect these details. But now it's clear as daylight. These photographs were cut, composited, and altered. Ashton closed his eyes. Every word Raymond spoke struck him like a hammer to the chest. Catherine had told the truth. For 8 years, she had been innocent. And he hadn't believed her. And the man in the pictures? Ashton asked, his voice rough and hoarse. Identified, Raymond flipped to the next page. His name was Patrick Lawrence, her cousin, living in Boston. I checked flight records, hotel records, and witnesses. On that exact day, Patrick Lawrence flew from Boston to Chicago to visit Catherine. He carried a message from her mother, who was seriously ill at the time. Patrick stayed in Chicago for exactly 2 days, and then flew back. It matches perfectly with everything Catherine said. Raymond paused. Patrick Lawrence died in a car accident 5 years ago. No one can testify directly anymore, but the paper trail can't be denied. Ashton opened his eyes, and his gaze turned dark. Who created those fake photographs? This is the most important part, boss, Raymond said, turning to the final page. I traced the original camera used for the source images. It belonged to a man named Marcus Webb, who used to work inside the Ashford organization. Right after those photographs were delivered to you 8 years ago, Marcus Webb suddenly quit and disappeared. No one knows where he went. I suspect he was paid to keep quiet, or Raymond didn't finish the sentence, but Ashton understood, or he'd been eliminated to seal the trail. Ashford, Ashton said, his voice like venom. Yes, the Ashford organization. Melanie's family? Raymond nodded, then continued. But there's something else, boss. And this may be what hurts you the most. He placed a stack of old papers on the desk, yellowed with age. 6 months after Miss Lawrence was thrown out, someone tried to contact you dozens of times. They called at least 30 times. They sent more than 20 letters. They even came to your office 4 times. Ashton frowned. I received nothing. Not one call. Not one letter. Because all of it was blocked, Raymond said slowly, stressing each word. The letters were burned before they could reach you. The calls were blocked at the switchboard. And every time she came to the office, security threw her out, saying you didn't want to see her. Who? Ashton snarled, his voice dangerous as a wild animal's growl. Who dared block communication to me? Raymond looked Ashton straight in the eyes. Melanie Ashford. During that entire period, she was frequently at your office under the excuse of helping you through the difficult time after your breakup with Miss Lawrence. She controlled every line of communication to you. Security and the switchboard staff were taking orders from her. Raymond paused, his voice heavy. And boss, those calls and those letters. Miss Lawrence was trying to tell you she was pregnant. She wanted you to know about the child. The pen in Ashton's hand snapped clean in two with a dry crack. Black ink spilled like blood across his fingers, and he didn't even notice. He sat there in silence, a silence that stretched so long Raymond felt the air in the room thicken. This wasn't ordinary silence. This was the silence before a storm, the silence of a volcano before it erupts. Ashton's eyes darkened like a sky before thunder. 8 years. 8 years Melanie had lied to him. 8 years she had stolen his family. 8 years Catherine had raised their son alone in poverty, while the one responsible lay beside him in bed every night. Every lie has an expiration date, and Melanie's 8 years of lies had just expired. While the storm of rage still rumbled inside Ashton over what Melanie had done, He forced himself to focus on something that mattered more: his son. For 8 years, he'd been absent from Jaden's life. For 8 years, the boy had grown up without a father. Ashton didn't know where to begin to make up for it, and the only way he knew to show affection was with money. The next day, a convoy of trucks loaded with toys pulled up in front of the estate. Ashton had bought almost an entire floor of the largest toy store in Chicago. Remote control robots, model race cars, an enormous Lego set, the newest game console, everything an 8-year-old boy could dream of. Jaden's room filled with toy boxes from the floor to nearly the ceiling. Ashton stood in the middle of it all, and for the first time in his life he felt restless and anxious, like a child waiting to be praised. Jaden walked in, gray eyes widening as he looked around. He made a slow circle, touched a few boxes, then turned back to Ashton with a politeness that made Ashton's heart ache. "Thank you, sir," Jaden said softly. "But I just want someone to read with me. Mom used to read to me every night before bed. Since Mom got really sick, she doesn't have the strength to read anymore. I miss her reading voice so much." Ashton stood there, surrounded by a mountain of expensive toys, and realized he'd gotten it completely wrong. This child didn't need his money. Jaden needed time. He needed presence. He needed love. The things Ashton didn't know how to give, because he'd never learned how. That night, Ashton knocked on Jaden's door with a book in his hand. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the one Margaret had said Jaden loved. The boy was already in bed, and his eyes lit up when he saw Ashton come in. You came to read to me." Ashton nodded awkwardly and sat down in the chair beside the bed. He opened the book, cleared his throat, and began to read. For the first time in 33 years of his life, Ashton Mercer read a fairy tale. His voice was clumsy, stumbling in the funny parts. He didn't know how to change his tone when he read different characters. He mispronounced a few words and had to go back and read them again. But Jaden didn't laugh at him. The boy lay curled under the blanket, eyes half closed, listening with a satisfied smile on his lips. When Mr. Wonka did something silly, Jaden let out a soft giggle. That clear, childlike sound was like a shaft of sunlight cutting through the darkness that had covered Ashton's heart for years. He felt something melting in his chest, something he hadn't known he still had. When the story reached the end of a chapter, Jaden suddenly spoke. "Sir, what do you do for a living that makes so many people afraid of you? I see everyone bow their heads when you walk by. Even the big security guards don't dare look you in the eyes." Ashton stopped reading, not knowing how to answer. How could he explain to an 8-year-old child that his father was a mafia boss? I do business," he said after a long silence. "Sometimes I have to be strict to protect the people I care about. The adult world is very complicated, Jaden." Jaden thought for a moment, then said, "Mom says the truly strong person is the one who doesn't need to make anyone afraid. Mom says real strength is making other people feel safe, not scared. Mom says the people who have to use fear to rule are the weakest ones, because they don't have any other way." Ashton fell silent for a long time. The words of an 8-year-old, or rather Catherine's words coming through her son's mouth, pierced straight through every layer of armor he'd built around himself. "Your mom is right," he whispered. "Your mom is always right." Outside Jaden's door, Catherine stood still in the darkness, watching through the narrow crack. She saw Ashton's broad back bent beside their son's bed, saw the awkward way he turned each page, saw how hard he was trying to become something he'd never known how to be. Her heart was full of contradictions. She wanted Jaden to have a father. She wanted her son to be loved completely, but part of her was still afraid. Afraid to trust. Afraid to open her heart and be hurt again the way she had been 8 years ago. Margaret stood beside Catherine and gently took her daughter's hand. "He's trying, my girl," she whispered. "For the first time in 8 years, I've seen him truly alive. Not just existing like an empty shell, but truly living." Ashton Mercer had commanded armies and crushed empires, but learning how to be a father, that was the hardest and most important battle of his life. 2 weeks passed inside the Mercer estate like a strange dream. Catherine went through her first surgery successfully and began showing positive signs of recovery. Color slowly returned to her once ashen cheeks. She could sit up longer. She could even take a few steps around the room with the support of a walker. Dr. Grant came to examine her every day, and each time he brought good news. "She's responding very well to treatment," the doctor told Ashton, his optimism careful and measured. "The targeted medication from Germany is working. If this continues, her chance of survival will increase significantly." I don't want to speak too soon, but this is very encouraging progress. Jaden was beside himself with joy watching his mother grow stronger each day. He no longer had to lie next to her all night, terrified she might slip away in her sleep. He began exploring the vast estate, playing in the garden, and little by little he started to open up to Ashton. Ashton felt relief too, even though he never showed it on the outside. Maybe he still had a chance. Maybe he could still fix what he'd broken. Maybe Catherine would live, and he would have time to prove himself. But fate has its own way of mocking anyone reckless enough to hope. That night, when the estate had fallen asleep, the medical alarm suddenly tore through the quiet. The relentless beeping of the heart monitor rang out, sharp and frantic. Ashton jolted out of bed and ran to Catherine's room as if he could outrun the sound itself. What he saw made the blood in his veins turn to ice. Catherine was convulsing on the bed, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. Sweat soaked her skin, her face flushed with a burning fever. The monitor screamed in continuous alarm as her heart raced out of rhythm. The night medical team was already there, chaotic as they fought to stabilize her. Dr. Grant was called urgently and arrived within 15 minutes, his face going pale the moment he saw his patient. "Everyone out," Dr. Grant shouted. "Only the nurses stay." Margaret wrapped Jaden in her arms and carried him out. The boy sobbed, calling for his mother in a voice that tore the heart in two. "Mom, don't go. Mom." Ashton stood outside the glass, staring into the room where Catherine was wrestling between life and death. His fists clenched so hard his nails cut into his palms, blood seeping out without him even noticing. He stood there for 3 hours, unmoving, saying nothing. 3 hours of hell. At last, Dr. Grant stepped out, his face drained with exhaustion and worry. "She's stable. But—" He hesitated. "What is it?" Ashton asked, his voice rough. "I ordered an emergency blood test when I saw symptoms that didn't fit. The results just came back." Dr. Grant looked Ashton straight in the eye. "There are signs of poisoning in her blood. Someone put a toxin into her medication or her food. Not a dose high enough to kill her immediately, but enough to weaken her immune system and sabotage the cancer treatment. If it had continued for a few more days, she wouldn't have made it, and everyone would have assumed the cancer simply got worse." Ashton said nothing. He just stood there, silent. But the silence around him made the whole room feel as if it had frozen solid. Dr. Grant had met dangerous men in his life, but he had never felt fear the way he felt it now. Ashton's eyes held none of the blazing anger people might imagine. They were cold. Cold as a frozen hell. Cold as death. "Raymond," Ashton said, his voice stripped of emotion, "check every security camera in the estate. Check everyone who's had contact with Catherine in the past week. Every meal, every pill, every glass of water. I want to know who, when, and how. Right now." Raymond nodded and vanished. 2 hours later, he returned with the answer. The security footage showed a nurse named Linda, hired only 3 days earlier, putting something into the water jug beside Catherine's bed. The image was clear, undeniable. "How was that nurse hired?" Ashton asked. Raymond swallowed. "She was recommended by Melanie Ashford. Miss Ashford said Linda was a trusted nurse from the hospital the Ashford family uses. She suggested her, and we accepted because we thought there was no reason to suspect the boss's fiancé." The silence stretched. Ashton stood by the window, staring into the darkness outside. Melanie. This time it wasn't just fake photographs. It wasn't just blocking letters. This time she had tried to kill Catherine. "Take that nurse," Ashton said, his voice so cold the air seemed to thicken. "I want everything she knows. And Raymond, arrange a meeting with Melanie Ashford. It's time we spoke to each other honestly. The Mafia boss had been ruthless to enemies for many years, but now that ruthlessness had found someone to protect, and God help anyone who dared stand in his way." Raymond led the nurse, Linda, into a sealed room in the basement of the estate. There was no need for violence or threats. The name Ashton Mercer alone, paired with the chill in Raymond's eyes, was enough to make her collapse. Linda shook like a leaf in a storm, tears pouring down her face, spilling everything she knew within 10 minutes. "Miss Ashford paid me," Linda sobbed. "She called me 3 days before I started working here. She told me I only had to put a little medication into the patient's food and drinking water, not a lethal dose. She said it was just to weaken the patient a little. She said if the patient died, it would be from the illness anyway. No one would suspect anything. I didn't know. I didn't think." What did you use? Raymond asked, his voice stripped of emotion. Linda gave the name of an industrial chemical that was easy to buy, but could damage internal organs with prolonged use. She also handed over text messages and call logs from Melanie's number as proof. That was enough. Ashton had everything he needed. That afternoon, Melanie received a call from Ashton inviting her to the Mercer estate. His tone was normal, nothing out of place. Melanie thought perhaps he'd reconsidered. Perhaps the wedding would go on as planned. She chose her most beautiful dress, perfected her makeup, and walked into Ashton's office, wearing a radiant smile. "Why did you call me?" Melanie asked, her voice sweet. "I thought maybe we should talk about the wedding. I know things have been a little complicated lately, but I believe—" "Sit down," Ashton cut in, his voice holding not a trace of warmth. Melanie blinked, but she kept her smile and sat in the chair across from his desk. Ashton stood by the window with his back to her. The silence stretched into something uncomfortable. "Ashton, you're making me worried," Melanie began. "The photographs from 8 years ago," Ashton spoke without turning around. "The pictures of Catherine with another man. I had them analyzed again with new technology. The results show they were fake. Photoshopped." Melanie felt as if someone had thrown ice water in her face, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about? Those were real. She stopped herself just in time. "The man in the photographs," Ashton continued as if he hadn't heard her, "was Patrick Lawrence, Catherine's cousin. He flew from Boston to Chicago on that exact day to see her because her mother was seriously ill. There are flight records, hotel receipts, witnesses. Not a lover, no betrayal, just two cousins seeing each other." Ashton turned, and his eyes locked onto Melanie like twin blades. "And the source of those photographs traces back to someone inside the Ashford organization. That person disappeared right after the job was done." Melanie's face began to drain of color. "Ashton, I don't understand what you're saying. Someone is framing my family." 6 months after Catherine was thrown out, Ashton cut her off, his voice turning colder by the second. "She tried to contact me dozens of times. Phone calls, letters, showing up at my office. Nothing ever reached me, because all of it was blocked. By you, Melanie. You controlled every line of communication to me during that time." Melanie opened her mouth, but no words came out. "And do you know what Catherine was trying to tell me?" Ashton asked, his voice like a blade. "She was pregnant. My child. She wanted me to know. But you blocked everything. You made sure I didn't know I had a son for 8 years. Melanie began to tremble. "Ashton, I can explain." And now, Ashton stepped forward until he stood directly in front of her, his gaze so cold she felt herself freezing. "You poisoned her. You hired a nurse to put chemicals into Catherine's food and water. You meant to kill her slowly and disguise it as death from illness." "No," Melanie screamed. "I didn't kill anyone. I only... She stopped abruptly, realizing she had just confessed. "You believe that woman over me." Melanie switched tactics, anger sharp in her voice. "She's a con artist. She came back to steal you from me." Ashton didn't answer. He simply placed evidence on the desk. A recording of Linda's confession, the texts and calls from Melanie's number, the photo analysis report, Patrick Lawrence's records, and proof of the blocked communications. Melanie stared at the pile, her face turning white as paper. There was nothing left to deny. And then she broke. "I love you," Melanie cried, tears and mascara mixing into black streaks down her cheeks. "I did everything because I love you. Don't you understand? I've loved you since I was 15. I waited for you. I waited for you to see me for years. But you only ever saw her, the servant's daughter." Ashton remained silent, his face empty of emotion. That silence was oil on the fire, and Melanie exploded completely. "Fine," she screamed, the mask finally shattering. "Yes, I did it all. I faked those photographs. I blocked every attempt she made to reach you. I hired someone to poison her. And so what? She doesn't deserve you. A cleaner's child. Low blood." She shot to her feet, eyes blazing. 8 years I stayed by your side. 8 years I built everything. 8 years I waited to stand beside you as your wife. And her. She only knew how to give birth to a bastard child, and now she comes back demanding everything." Melanie laughed like she'd lost her mind. "You know what, Ashton? You're a monster. You don't know what love is. You only know how to possess and destroy." She'll realize that soon enough, too. You'll ruin her the way you ruin everything you touch. The silence stretched on. Ashton looked at the woman in front of him, the woman he'd thought for 8 years would become his wife. He didn't feel anger anymore. He felt disgust. The engagement is over. Immediately, Ashton said, his voice cold as ice. Cut all ties with the Ashford family. And Melanie, listen carefully. If you or your father so much as touch Catherine or Jaden, even a single hair, I will consider it a declaration of war. You know how I deal with enemies. He nodded to Raymond. Take her out. Melanie was dragged from the room by 2 guards. She screamed like someone possessed. You'll regret this. My father won't forgive you. You'll lose everything. Ashton. Ashed. The door slammed shut. The screams faded behind thick walls. The alliance was shattered. War had been declared. But Ashton Mercer finally knew what he was fighting for. Not power, not territory, but family. Melanie rushed back to the Ashford estate like a wounded animal. Mascara smeared, hair in wild disarray, her expensive dress wrinkled and torn. She stormed straight into her father's office without knocking. Wesley Ashford sat behind his desk, his face darkening as he took in his daughter's pathetic state. He already knew what had happened. In the underworld, news spread as fast as wildfire. You've ruined everything. Wesley slammed his hand on the desk and rose, his voice roaring. 8 years. 8 years I built an alliance with the Mercer Empire. 8 years I prepared for this wedding to merge 2 families. And you destroyed it all over some stupid childish woman's grudge. Dad, Melanie shouted back. I did everything for the family. I removed Catherine Lawrence 8 years ago so I could stand beside Ashton, so the Ashford family could take control of the Mercer Empire through this marriage. And now what? Wesley ground out. He knows everything. He declared he's cutting ties with our family. He knows you poisoned that woman. Do you understand what that means? Ashton Mercer isn't the type to forgive and forget. He'll retaliate. Melanie trembled, but forced her voice to stay steady. Then we have to act first, Dad. If he uncovers more, it won't just be the wedding that falls apart. He'll swallow our whole family. You know what he can do. He doesn't even have to get his hands dirty. 1 phone call, and we're wiped off the map of Chicago. Wesley fell silent, thinking. He knew his daughter was right. Ashton Mercer wasn't an enemy you could take lightly. The Mercer Empire was 3 times stronger than the Ashford family. If Ashton decided to strike, they wouldn't stand a chance. There's only one way left, Wesley finally said, his voice low and dangerous. We hit first, before he has time to prepare. He's busy taking care of that sick woman and that kid. That's his weakness. Melanie lifted her head. What are you going to do? Catherine Lawrence and the child, Wesley said slowly. We take them hostage. Ashton values them enough to declare war on our family. Fine. Then he'll be willing to kneel to save them. Melanie's eyes widened. You want to kidnap them. We won't hurt the child, Wesley reassured her. Just leverage. Mercer will have to concede. He'll have to sign an agreement not to touch the Ashford family, transfer part of his business territory, and withdraw every threat. Simple as a commercial negotiation. The only difference is that we'll be holding what he values most as our bargaining chip. Melanie nodded, a dark spark of hope flashing in her eyes. Let me prepare a few days, Wesley said. First, I'll send him a message. Pretend I want to negotiate peace. Distract him. At the same time, Ashton's phone buzzed with a message from Wesley Ashford. Ashton, I think we should meet. Melanie's actions were wrong and I had no idea. Let's negotiate peace like civilized men. For the good of both sides. Ashton read the message, his eyes narrowing. He handed the phone to Raymond. What do you think? Raymond read it and scoffed. This is a trap, boss. Wesley Ashford never negotiates after being insulted. He's buying time to set something up. Of course it's a trap. Ashton nodded. The question is, what kind of trap? What does he want? A direct attack? No, Ashford doesn't have the strength. Kidnapping. Hostages. He went silent for a moment. Then his gaze sharpened with sudden, icy clarity. Catherine and Jaden. They'll go after Catherine and Jaden. Raymond nodded. I think so too. That's the only weakness boss has now. Ashton rose and walked to the window, looking out as night settled over Chicago. Move Catherine and Jaden to a secret safe house tonight. No one is to know the location except me and you. Triple security. And Raymond, I'll stay with them instead of the office. If Ashford wants to get near my family, he'll have to step over my dead body first." Ashton turned back to Raymond, his eyes cold with resolve. "If they want war, they'll have war, but by my rules, not theirs." While the enemy sharpened knives in the dark, Ashton Mercer prepared for a war he never wanted, but would never lose. Because now, he had something worth fighting for. 3 days after they were moved to the safe house, the fateful night arrived. The clock had just struck 2 in the morning when the alarm siren ripped through the silence. The shrill sound echoed through the house, yanking everyone out of sleep. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything like a vast black curtain. Ashton was on his feet instantly. The instincts of a Mafia boss honed over years, making him react faster than anyone else. He grabbed the gun from beneath his pillow and rushed out of the room, heading straight for the bedroom where Catherine and Jaden were. Footsteps thundered from outside. Shouted orders cut through the air, mixed with the sound of shattering glass. Wesley Ashford's men had arrived, more of them, and faster than Ashton had predicted. They breached from multiple directions at once, striking like a storm. The radio in Ashton's ear crackled with Raymond's voice. "Boss, they've got at least 30 men. They're hitting from the north and the east. We're holding the outer line, but there are too many of them." Gunfire sounded in the distance, not constant, but steady. Flashlights swept through the dark like ghostly eyes searching for prey. Ashton reached Catherine and Jaden's door and planted himself in front of it, gun ready in his hand. His face was ice, not a trace of fear, but his eyes burned with a force of resolve no one had ever seen in this cold Mafia king. "No one gets through this door," he whispered to himself. "No one." The radio crackled again. "Boss, they're trying to break the inner perimeter. 10 more minutes and they'll reach the main door. We're holding them back, but—" "Hold them," Ashton snarled. "At any cost. 10 minutes is enough." Inside the pitch-black room, Catherine and Jaden were huddled in the farthest corner. Catherine was too weak to move much, her body still not fully recovered after the poisoning. Jaden clung to his mother, his small body shielding her with everything he had. The boy trembled, fear reaching all the way into his bones. But he didn't cry, not a single tear. He bit his lip hard, eyes wide in the darkness, trying to see anything that might be danger. "Jaden," Catherine whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. "You're so brave. I'm proud of you." "I'll protect you," Jaden answered, his voice shaking but fierce with determination. "I'll protect you like he's doing." Catherine looked toward the door where Ashton's silhouette stood guard. She could see him through the narrow crack, standing there like a fortress, ready to face anything. Her heart clenched with an emotion she'd tried to bury for 8 years. "You're like your father," Catherine whispered, not realizing she'd used that word until it left her mouth. "Brave and stubborn. Just like your father." Jaden lifted his head to look at his mother, his eyes lighting up even in the dark. It was the first time she had called Mr. Mercer his father so naturally. Outside, the gunfire began to thin. Ashton's radio sounded again, Raymond's voice bright with excitement. "Boss, we pushed them back. They're retreating. We caught 7, the rest got away." Ashton let out a long breath, but he didn't lower his gun until Raymond himself came to report the area was completely secure. Wesley's men had failed badly. They had underestimated Ashton's preparation and paid the price. When everything finally fell quiet again, Ashton pushed the door open and stepped into the room where Catherine and Jaden were still huddled in the corner. Jaden still held his mother tightly, eyes lifting when he heard the door. When he realized it was Ashton, the boy's body loosened with relief, but he still didn't let go of his mother. Catherine looked up too. Her gaze was complicated, full of feelings she couldn't name. Fear, relief, gratitude, and something deeper she had tried to deny for 8 years. Ashton stood there for a moment, looking at the mother and child in the dark corner. Then he did something no one would have expected. The cold Mafia boss, the man who never showed emotion in front of anyone, slowly knelt. He knelt in front of Catherine and Jaden, opened his arms, and pulled both of them into his embrace. Not a word, no explanation, just an embrace. Jaden broke down, the tears he'd held back all night finally spilling free. He clung to Ashton and his mother, his small body shaking. Catherine cried too, silent tears sliding down her pale cheeks. She didn't speak. She simply let Ashton hold her, let herself be held. In that dark room, holding his family for the first time, Ashton understood what he had been fighting for all this time. Not power, not revenge. Just this. Just them. 2 nights after the attack, the safe house had been reinforced many times over, and everything seemed to have settled again. But for Jaden, fear didn't disappear that easily. The boy jolted awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat that soaked through his pajamas. His heart hammered wildly, as if it wanted to leap out of his chest. In the dream, he saw men dressed in black rushing into the room, dragging his mother away while he screamed but couldn't do anything. He ran and ran but never reached her. Jaden sat up with a sharp gasp, breathing fast. He wanted to call for his mother, to run to her room and make sure she was still there, still safe. But he didn't. His mother needed rest. She was sick. He mustn't make her worry more. He had been the man of the house for 8 years. He had to be strong. Jaden hugged his pillow and curled in on himself in the darkness, trying to control his breathing. He didn't know Ashton was making his rounds in the hallway and heard the small sound from Jaden's room. The door eased open. Jaden startled and lifted his head, eyes wide in the dark. When he recognized Ashton's tall silhouette, he let out a breath of relief, then felt awkward at being caught awake in the middle of the night. "I'm fine," Jaden said quickly, his voice still trembling. Ashton didn't speak. He only stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed beside Jaden. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago sat there, clumsy, not knowing what to do. He had never comforted a child after a nightmare. He didn't know what to say, what to do with his hands, where to put his voice. In the end, he simply rested a hand on Jaden's shoulder. An awkward gesture, but an honest one. "What did you dream about?" Ashton asked gently. Jaden was silent for a moment before answering, his voice so small it was almost a whisper. "I dreamed bad people took my mom. I ran after them, but I couldn't catch up. I couldn't save her." Ashton's hand tightened a little on Jaden's shoulder. "It was only a dream. No one is taking your mom. I promise. I won't let anyone hurt your mom or you. Never." Jaden looked up at Ashton. In the dark, the boy's eyes glimmered with tears that hadn't fallen yet. He held Ashton's gaze for a long time, as if searching for something. Then he asked, his voice shaking, Are you my dad?" Silence filled the room. Ashton felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. That simple question from an 8-year-old made the mafia boss, who had faced death without flinching, suddenly lose his words. "How long have you known?" Ashton asked, his voice rough. Jaden lowered his head, small fingers worrying the edge of the blanket. "I'm not sure. But I see your eyes. They look like mine in the mirror. Every time I look in the mirror, I wonder why my eyes aren't like Mom's. Mom said I have my dad's eyes." The boy looked up again. "And Mom said my dad is very strong, very powerful. But he got lost. One day he'll find his way home." Ashton felt his heart being squeezed shut. Even after he had betrayed her, even after she had been thrown out in shame, Catherine had never said a single bad word about him to their son. She had still given Jaden the image of a good father, even though, in reality, he had abandoned them for 8 years. "Yes," Ashton said, his voice thick. "I'm your dad. I'm sorry I came late. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you and your mom all those years. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to make it right. But I want you to know that from now on, I'll always be here. I promise." Jaden stared at him, tears starting to roll down his cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were the tears of a child finally hearing the words he'd waited his whole life to hear. "I'm not mad at you," Jaden said, his voice breaking. "Mom said you should never keep anger in your heart. Mom said you'd come when you were ready. I waited. I waited a really long time." Ashton felt his eyes burn. The mafia boss hadn't cried since the day his father died, but now he could feel tears rising beyond his control. "Your mom," he said, his voice shaking. "Your mom is more wonderful than anyone I've ever known. I don't deserve her, but I'll try. Every day, I'll try." Jaden suddenly threw himself into Ashton's arms, holding his father tight. The boy sobbed. All the emotion he'd held in for 8 years finally released. Ashton held his son back, tight enough as if he feared that if he let go, the child would vanish. His tears fell silently into Jaden's black hair. "I waited for you," Jaden whispered against Ashton's chest. "Me too," Ashton answered, his voice choking. "Even though I didn't know it. I waited for you for 8 years without even knowing you existed." Outside the half-open door, Catherine stood still in the darkness. She had come to check on her son after hearing a sound, but she stopped when she saw what was happening inside. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she watched father and son holding each other. Margaret stood beside Catherine, gently taking her daughter's hand and smiling. No one said anything. No one needed to. The boy had waited 8 years for a father. The father had waited 8 years without knowing he had a child. In that embrace, 8 years of distance finally dissolved. After the failed attack, Wesley Ashford believed he had time to prepare another plan. He was wrong. Ashton Mercer didn't wait. But he didn't use guns or violence either. He used a weapon far more dangerous: information. The very next morning, Ashton summoned Raymond and the entire intelligence network of the Mercer Empire. It was a web built over decades, with eyes and ears in every corner of Chicago and far beyond. Lawyers, accountants, bank employees, government officials, police officers, all of them had Mercer people among them, or people who owed Mercer a favor. "I want everything," Ashton ordered. "Every dark secret Wesley Ashford has, every illegal deal, every hidden partner, every falsified tax record, every laundered dollar, everything he's tried to hide for 30 years. I want it in 72 hours. 72 hours later, Raymond placed a thick stack of files in front of Ashton. "Enough to bury him 10 times over, boss," Raymond said with rare satisfaction. "Money laundering through 6 shell companies. Tax evasion of at least $20 million over the past 10 years. Weapons smuggling with 2 gangs in Mexico. Bribing at least 3 federal officials. And more." Ashton nodded and flipped through the files. Perfect. The next step began immediately. Ashton picked up his phone and started calling every ally the Ashford family had left. Every call carried the same message. "I know you do business with Wesley Ashford. I don't care about the past. But from this moment forward, you have 2 choices. 1. Cut all ties with Ashford immediately. 2. Stand with him and stand against me." No one in Chicago's underworld wanted to be Ashton Mercer's enemy. A week later, Wesley Ashford had lost 70% of his allies. Men who once swore they'd stand beside him now avoided him like a plague. Wesley's phone rang without stopping, but not with support, with cold notices of severed partnerships. The Ashford Empire was collapsing piece by piece, and Ashton still wasn't finished. The final step was the most decisive one of all. Ashton copied the entire criminal dossier on Wesley Ashford, erased every trace that could be tied back to the Mercer Empire, and sent it anonymously to the FBI through an underground channel. The evidence was clear, detailed, impossible to deny. The FBI couldn't ignore it even if they wanted to. Wesley panicked when he realized what was happening. In desperation, he tried to call Ashton. "Ashton, we can negotiate." Wesley's voice trembled through the phone. "I know it's gone too far, but we can fix this. I'll control Melanie. She won't bother you or your family again. I swear. I'll send her overseas. You'll never have to see her again." Silence stretched on the other end of the line. Then Ashton's voice came through, cold as ice. 8 years ago, you stayed silent while your daughter destroyed Catherine's life. You stayed silent while she used fake photographs to tear us apart. You stayed silent while she blocked every attempt Catherine made to reach me, even when she tried to tell me she was pregnant. You knew everything, Wesley. You knew and you did nothing. I didn't know the details." Wesley tried to defend himself. Melanie acted on her own. Lies, Ashton snarled. "You knew everything. You just didn't care. As long as your daughter got what she wanted, as long as the alliance between our families was established, you didn't care who got destroyed along the way. You didn't care that an innocent woman was thrown out in shame. You didn't care that your grandson grew up without a father in poverty." Ashton drew a slow breath. "Now you'll pay. Not because of me, because of Catherine, because of Jaden, because of the 8 years you stole from them." The call ended with a cold click. Wesley Ashford stood alone in his estate, holding the dead phone, trembling like a leaf in the wind. 2 days later, the FBI moved. A task force raided the Ashford estate at dawn. Wesley was arrested on a long list of federal charges: money laundering, tax evasion, weapons smuggling, bribery of officials. Every charge backed by evidence that couldn't be denied. Footage of Wesley Ashford in handcuffs being led out of his own estate played on every news broadcast. The Ashford Empire, built over 3 decades, collapsed in a single night. Ashton Mercer didn't need bullets to destroy the Ashford family. He used their own lies, their own sins, their own darkness against them. and the collapse was absolute. Melanie was in her private apartment when the news of her father's arrest flashed across the television. She stood frozen in front of the screen, watching Wesley Ashford in handcuffs being marched out of the family estate, his face pale and panicked. The reporter spoke of a long list of federal charges, of evidence that couldn't be denied, of the likelihood that Wesley would spend the rest of his life in prison. Melanie's phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from lawyers warning that she could be prosecuted next. Messages from fake friends cutting ties immediately. Messages from the bank informing her that her accounts had been frozen under an FBI order. Melanie's world was collapsing around her, and she had only one choice left: to run. She didn't have much time. Melanie tore through the apartment, searching for the cash she'd hidden in her private safe. More than $50,000. Not much compared to the life of luxury she'd lived, but enough to disappear for a while. She also had a forged passport made years ago for emergencies. Melanie changed into plain clothes, put on oversized sunglasses, pulled a hat low to hide her signature blonde hair. She called a taxi to O'Hare International Airport with a plan to fly to Europe, vanish into the crowd, and begin a new life somewhere no one knew who she was. On the way to the airport, Melanie stared out the car window as Chicago slid past, the city where she'd lived her whole life. The city where she'd believed she would become a queen by marrying Ashton Mercer. Now, it was all ash. She reached the airport, got through the check-in counter without any problem. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the security gate. If she could just get past this checkpoint, she would be free. Just a few more steps. Melanie handed the forged passport to the agent. He looked at the passport, looked at her, then looked back at the passport. Melanie's heart nearly stopped. Then he nodded and handed it back. She exhaled in relief and stepped through the metal detector. Safe. She was safe. But the moment she walked out of the screening area, 2 men in black suits blocked her path, and behind them stood a large FBI team. "Melanie Ashford," one of the men said, his voice cold and professional. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, use of forged documents, and aiding and abetting a criminal organization. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Cold handcuffs snapped around Melanie's wrists before she could even react. She was led through the crowded airport, through hundreds of curious eyes and raised phones recording. Reporters' cameras flashed. People whispered. Her name would be on every evening broadcast. And then, in the middle of the crowd, Melanie saw him. Ashton Mercer stood not far away, watching with a calm, unreadable face. Not angry, not triumphant, just composed, as if he were watching a play ending exactly the way it was written. Melanie lost control. She thrashed in the agent's grip, screaming with every shred of strength she had left. "Ashton, you'll regret this. Do you hear me? You'll regret this. That woman doesn't deserve you. She's the servant's daughter. She has nothing but a bastard child. No one loves you the way I do. No one." Ashton stepped closer, close enough that Melanie could hear him, even though he spoke in a whisper. "You're wrong, Melanie," he said, his calm almost frightening. "I'm the one who doesn't deserve her. 8 years ago I didn't deserve her. I believed your lies instead of believing the woman I loved. I threw her out without giving her a chance to explain. I missed 8 years beside my son." He looked her straight in the eyes. "But now, I'll spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of her, of my son, of my family." Melanie stared into Ashton's eyes, and for the first time in 8 years, she saw something she'd never seen there before. Not coldness, not emptiness. Peace. He had found peace. The peace she'd tried to give him for 8 years and failed to give. And he had found it in the woman she had tried to destroy. "No," Melanie whispered, her voice breaking. "No," she screamed one last time as she was dragged away. But Ashton had already turned and walked off. Without looking back, the FBI vehicle door slammed shut. Melanie's screams were swallowed by silence. The woman who had stolen 8 years of happiness had finally paid the price. And Melanie Ashford learned the most painful lesson of all. You can't build love on lies, and you can't threaten the family of a mafia boss and walk away unscathed. 3 months had passed since Melanie and Wesley Ashford were arrested. 3 months of peace the Mercer estate hadn't tasted in years. And 3 months of a miracle. Catherine was recovering in a way no one had dared to hope for. Her cancer markers dropped week by week, test after test. The tumor responded beautifully to the targeted medication from Germany. The second surgery went smoothly. removing every remaining malignant cell. With each passing day, Catherine grew stronger. Her hair began to grow back, soft brown strands like silk slowly covering the scalp chemotherapy had left bare. Color returned to her cheeks, no longer pale as paper. Her green eyes, once dulled by illness, now shone every time she smiled. And she smiled more. Much more. Dr. Grant came for regular checkups, and couldn't hide his amazement each time. "I've been a doctor for 25 years, he told Ashton after the most recent appointment. "I've seen many late-stage cancer patients. This is one of the most astonishing recoveries I've ever witnessed. Science can explain part of it. Good medication, successful surgery, careful care. But the rest?" He shook his head. "I call it a miracle." Ashton looked out through the window toward the garden, where Catherine sat on a bench reading to Jaden. "I call it willpower," he replied. "She has a reason to live. She has a son who needs her. And she's the strongest woman I've ever known." The Mercer estate had changed completely over the past 3 months. Hallways that had once been cold and empty were now filled with laughter. Margaret stayed busy from morning until night, happily cooking the dishes her daughter loved, grateful to care for her grandson after 8 years apart. Jaden ran through the vast estate, exploring every corner, befriending the security team, softening even the hardest men with his smile. And there was a new member of the household, Whiskers, a little white kitten Ashton brought home for Jaden one weekend afternoon. Jaden loved the kitten like treasure, carried it everywhere, and told it endless stories. It was an ordinary morning like any other. Catherine was making pancakes in the kitchen, something she insisted on doing herself even though Margaret kept trying to take over. Ashton sat at the dining table reading the newspaper, glancing at Catherine now and then with a gentleness only she ever got to see. Jaden sat across from Ashton, Whiskers curled on his lap, eating and talking nonstop about the new book he was reading. "And then, the main character," Jaden was saying eagerly when he realized his pancakes needed more salt. He looked around, saw the salt shaker right beside Ashton, and completely naturally, without thinking, the boy blurted out, "Dad, can you pass me the salt?" The whole kitchen froze. Catherine whipped around from the stove, the chopsticks in her hand almost slipping. Margaret went still by the sink. Ashton lifted his head from the newspaper, eyes widening. It took Jaden a few seconds to realize what he had just said. His face turned red as a tomato. He stammered, I mean, sir, the salt?" Ashton set the newspaper down and looked at his son with an expression no one could read. "What did you just call me?" he asked, his voice rough. Jaden lowered his head, ears burning red. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Jaden." Ashton said his son's name again, his voice trembling slightly. "What did you just call me?" The boy lifted his head, looking into his father's eyes with worry tangled up with hope. "Dad." A whisper so soft it was almost breath. Ashton didn't speak. The most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago stood up, walked around the table, and wrapped his son in his arms. He held him so tightly Jaden nearly lost his breath. "Can I call you Dad? From now on?" Jaden asked, his voice catching in his father's embrace. "You can call me anytime," Ashton answered, his eyes blurred with tears. "Anytime you want. Dad will always be here." Catherine stood by the stove, tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. Margaret stood beside her, crying too, smiling too, her hand gripping her daughter's hand. No one said anything else. No one needed to. The doctors called it a miracle. Margaret called it a blessing. But Ashton knew the truth. Love is the strongest medicine. And this family finally had enough love to heal everything. After the day Jaden first called Ashton Dad, everything in the Mercer estate seemed to shift in subtle ways. Ashton started courting Catherine in a way he'd never courted anyone in his life. Not with money or expensive gifts, but with small, sincere, awkward things. Every morning, he brought a small bouquet to Catherine's room. Not roses from a luxury florist, not costly imported orchids, but wildflowers, little yellow daisies, and lavender that Catherine had loved when they were young. Ashton asked Margaret to tell him what kinds of flowers Catherine liked, then went out himself to pick them from the garden behind the estate at dawn, before Catherine woke. He also wrote Catherine letters. Clumsy handwritten letters, the handwriting of a man used to signing million-dollar contracts, now trembling as he tried to put feeling into words. Each letter was only a few lines, halting and awkward, but sincere down to every syllable. Catherine, I'm not good at beautiful words, but I want you to know that waking up each day and seeing you still here is the thing I'm most grateful for. In the late afternoons, when sunset painted the Chicago sky red, the two of them sat side by side on the third-floor balcony, where they could see the entire garden and, far away, the city skyline. They didn't talk much. They just sat together in quiet, sometimes letting their hands brush lightly. 8 years apart had left them needing time to learn how to be together again. One weekend afternoon, Ashton decided he would cook dinner himself for Catherine and Jaden. He chased everyone out of the kitchen, even Margaret, though she tried to protest. 30 minutes later, the fire alarm blared through the estate. Ashton stood in the middle of a haze of smoke, his face smudged with soot, staring at a pan of pasta burned black with the stunned expression of a man who had just lost the biggest battle of his life. Catherine rushed into the kitchen and stopped dead at the chaotic scene. Then she laughed. She laughed until tears streamed down her face. She laughed until she had to clutch her stomach because it hurt. It was the first time in many years that Catherine laughed for real, without holding back, without restraining herself. The sound rang like a clear bell, sweeping away whatever darkness still lingered in the estate. Jaden appeared in the kitchen doorway with a phone in his hand, snapping pictures over and over. "Evidence!" the boy shouted. "I'm keeping this so when Dad tries to yell at me for not knowing how to cook, I can show him this." Ashton lifted a hand as if to threaten him, but no one was afraid. All three of them laughed, and in the end they ordered pizza for dinner that night. One night on the balcony, when Jaden was asleep and the estate had sunk into quiet, Catherine suddenly spoke. "I'm afraid, Ashton." Ashton turned to look at her, moonlight bright on Catherine's face, now healthy with color again. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid to believe," Catherine whispered, her eyes fixed somewhere far away, "afraid to open my heart and be hurt again. Afraid this is all a dream and I'll wake up back in that old apartment, alone, dying." Ashton took her hand, his rough palm closing around her smaller one. "I understand," he said softly. "I hurt you in a way that can't be forgiven. I didn't believe you. I threw you out. I made you endure 8 years alone." Catherine turned to look at him. "But I forgave you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That's what scares me. I forgave you too easily. I don't know if that makes me strong or foolish." "That isn't weakness," Ashton answered, squeezing her hand tighter. "That's strength, a strength I've never had. I held on to hatred for 8 years because I thought you betrayed me. But you forgive me even though I truly betrayed your trust. You're stronger than I am, Catherine. You've always been stronger." Silence stretched between them, the night breeze moving gently across the balcony, carrying the scent of flowers from the garden below. "I won't promise I'll be perfect," Ashton said, his voice low and sincere. "I won't promise I'll never hurt you. I'm a man with many flaws and I'll make mistakes. But I promise one thing. I promise I'll be with you. Every day. Even if it takes the rest of my life to prove to you that I'm worthy." Catherine turned toward him, green eyes shining in the moonlight, blurred with tears that hadn't fallen. "The rest of my life," she whispered, her lips curving into a soft smile. "That sounds like a good beginning." Under the silver moon, Ashton leaned down. Catherine lifted her face. Their kiss was gentle and trembling, as if both of them were afraid it might be a dream that would vanish at any second. But it wasn't a dream. This time it was real. Finally, Jaden's voice rang out from the doorway, shattering the romantic moment. "I've been waiting forever. Why are you two taking so long?" Both of them startled and turned to see Jaden standing there with a huge grin before the boy burst into giggles and ran off. Catherine and Ashton looked at each other and then laughed together. They had lost 8 years to lies and pain. But real love doesn't expire. It waits. And their love had waited long enough. 6 months after that first kiss on the balcony, beside Lake Michigan under a blaze of golden sunset, a wedding was taking place that was simple, yet warmer than any lavish ceremony could ever be. There were no hundreds of guests, no glittering display for Chicago's elite. Only the closest people were there. Raymond in a crisp black suit standing as the witness, Margaret in the finest dress of her life, crying from the first moment to the last, Dr. Grant smiling with quiet satisfaction as he watched the most miraculous patient of his career, and a few trusted friends Ashton had known for years. Jaden stood at the head of the aisle with the most important role of all, the ring bearer. He wore a tiny tailored suit, his bow tie tilted to one side no matter how many times Margaret had straightened it. The grin on his face was so bright it looked as if it might split wide open, both hands clutching the ring box as if he were holding the most precious treasure in the world. He took the duty with solemn seriousness, as if he were carrying out the most important mission of his life. When the music began, Catherine stepped out from a small white tent set up near the water's edge. She wore a simple ivory wedding dress, no jeweled beading, no complicated lace, only soft silk that draped gently over the body that had grown strong again. Her brown hair had grown to her shoulders, soft and light in the evening breeze, crowned with a small circle of white flowers instead of any expensive tiara. She wore no jewelry except the pearl earrings Margaret had given her, yet she glowed more than any bride Ashton had ever seen. Healthy, happy, alive. Ashton stood at the end of the aisle, breathless as he watched her walk toward him. This was the woman he had thrown out into the rain 8 years ago. This was the woman who had raised their son alone in poverty without bitterness. This was the woman who had forgiven him when he did not deserve forgiveness. And this was the woman he would spend the rest of his life loving. When Catherine reached Ashton, the officiant began the ceremony, but everything truly settled into something sacred when it came time for their vows. Catherine spoke first, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I once thought I would die alone, in a cold hospital, far from my son. I thought that would be the end of my life. I accepted it, but then a letter, a brave little boy crossing a dangerous city, and a man who finally found his way home changed everything. Ashton, I promise I will love you. I will stand beside you in good days and hard days, and I will build with you the family we both deserve to have." Ashton swallowed hard, fighting to contain what was rising inside him. His voice came out rough as he answered, 8 years ago, I was a fool. I held love in my hands and let it slip away because I believed lies. I used to think power was everything, that the empire I built would give my life meaning. I was wrong. Catherine, you are everything. You and Jaden are everything. I promise I will spend every remaining day of my life becoming worthy of you, loving you, protecting our family, and never repeating that mistake again. The rings were exchanged, and the officiant smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Ashton pulled Catherine into his arms and kissed her, as if the world around them didn't exist. Kissed her, as if 8 years of separation were dissolving in this one moment. Kissed her as if it were the first kiss of his life, and the last. "Finally," Jaden shouted, shattering the sacred moment. "You two took forever." Everyone burst into laughter. Jaden ran forward. Ashton bent down and lifted him up, and the three of them held each other amid applause and tears of happiness from everyone watching. A family, finally reunited. That night, after the small celebration ended and Jaden was asleep with whiskers curled beside him, Ashton and Catherine stood by the bedroom window looking out at Chicago, glittering under the night sky. "Did you ever think we'd have today?" Catherine asked softly. "No," Ashton answered honestly. "I gave up hope a long time ago. I thought I would live and die alone in the dark, in the emptiness I created for myself. And now," Ashton turned to his wife, a rare smile on his mouth. "Now I have light." "You're so cheesy," Catherine giggled. "You did this to me." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sleeping city. "Is a lifetime enough for you to make up for 8 years?" Catherine asked quietly. "Not enough," Ashton said, his voice low and sincere. "But it's all I have, and I'll give every bit of it to you and our son." Catherine rested her head on his shoulder and smiled, satisfied. "That sounds perfect." In a city of darkness and power, the most feared man in Chicago had finally found his light. A brave boy had crossed a dangerous city with a letter. A woman had forgiven the unforgivable. And a love that waited 8 years had finally bloomed again. Some stories end in tragedy, but this one ended exactly where it should have begun long ago, with a family, together, where they belonged. The end. Thank you for following this story to the very last minute. Today's story brings us many deep lessons about life. The first is the power of forgiveness. Catherine could have hated Ashton for the rest of her life, but she chose to let go to free herself and to give her son the chance to have a whole family. The second is the value of true love. Money and power can't buy happiness. Ashton had an empire, but for 8 years he lived in emptiness, and only when he found his family did he truly live. The third is never underestimate the strength of a child. Jaden was only 8 years old, but he did what no adult dared, carrying a letter across a dangerous city to save his mother. And finally, the lesson about trust. Don't rush to judge someone based on what you see. Give them a chance to explain. Ashton lost 8 years because he believed fake photographs and refused to listen to Catherine. What did you think of this story? Have any of you ever lived through a misunderstanding with someone you loved? Do you believe in second chances? Share your feelings in the comments below. We truly want to hear the voice from deep in your heart. If this story touched you, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our exciting videos every day. Don't forget to share this video with friends who believe in love and second chances in life. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a life full of joy and happiness every day. Remember that no matter how hard life gets, there is always light at the end of the tunnel, just like Catherine and Ashton found their light after 8 years of darkness. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.